Hey everyone, our passage on Sunday was Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 to 20. So let's start by doing the Swedish Bible study method, where one of you reads the passage out aloud, then spend a few minutes as individuals with the passage in front of you, marking the passage against these three things: an exclamation mark against anything that stands out, a question mark against any questions you have, and an arrow against anything that the passage tells you to do. Hit the pause button now and restart when you are ready. So on Sunday, we had a guest speaker, Miriam Swaffield, from the Fusion Student Movement, preaching on the passage known as the Great Commission, which, if you like, is Jesus' game plan for his disciples and the church. But she started by saying that if you just read the last part in isolation, if you just kick in with what Jesus has told us to do, then it won't feel like a great commission as much as it will feel like a crushing commission, and it definitely won't feel like good news. Verse 18 starts like this: "Then Jesus came to them." And she pointed out that whenever you read a word like then, you need to ask, well, what came before that? What does that then contain, if you like? What are the things that make up that then? And really, it's everything that's happened that these pictures sort of try and capture in the rest of the passage. So let's just zoom out a bit and quickly speed through the beginning. So verse 1, it's a lot. Jesus has died, as have the hopes of his disciples and followers, as Mary then go to his tomb. Then there's an earthquake. I said a lot happened. And the tomb opens up and Jesus is gone. An angel then appears and tells them, don't be afraid, as angels always do, because they seem to be quite scary. And he says, go to the other disciples and tell them that Jesus is alive. The thing he said he'd do, he's gone and done it. Okay, so they start to go. They go to tell his disciples. The women are the first evangelists. They go to tell the other apostles. And as they do that, suddenly Jesus meets them. And he's like, very casual, greetings, he said. They came to him, they clasped his feet, and they worship him. And he repeats the same things. He says, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers, as in no hard grudges, guys. Go to Galilee, the town all began, and tell the boys that the thing I said I'd do, I've done. The plan is still on. And then we get kind of a little cutaway. Scene 3. While the women are there, the guards, whose job it was to keep Jesus in the tomb, realize that they've not done their job well. They are going to be in trouble. So they go to their leaders and they go, oh gosh, we killed him. It didn't work. And so they come up with this idea. They're going to start a rumor that the body was stolen. It's kind of a link back to Psalm 2. The rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. And they start this rumor, which we hear has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day, that his body was been stolen. So here you've got a political tension. The disciples are about to become wanted men. It's not an easy place to share your faith. Then the women obviously get to the disciples. Then the 11 disciples go to Galilee. That's a really sad bit, isn't it? The 11 disciples, one of them is missing. The team is wounded, but yet still Jesus calls them. They go to Galilee, where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, and some doubted. Some doubted. Despite all of this, they still have questions. They still have hesitations. And actually, in fact, while some have doubts, the others, they don't get it at all. If you look at the recording of this in Acts, they ask possibly the silliest question you could possibly ask for a group that have just spent 3 years with Jesus. So there are those that doubted, there are those that are confidently wrong, which brings us all the way back to where we started, then. That's all the things contained in that then. Then, after Jesus rose from the dead, defeated sin, met with the female disciples, met with his male disciples, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, and we're going to look at that in a moment. But question 1 is, what is your then? What is your then? What's your backstory? If you had to do a summary, like the writer Matthew has done here, how would you tell your story of how Jesus came to you? How did you hear of Jesus? What were or are the challenges in accepting him? What causes you to worship him? Why do you love him? And what are your big questions? And what I'd love you to do is just bullet point an answer to those, maybe on your piece of paper, and then briefly share. You've got 1 minute to share your answers to those four. It's great to share the stories of how we came to Jesus and what's going on in our lives with our friends. So just take 1 minute each just to share what's your then. So pause now and come back when you're done. So I hope that was really fascinating and encouraging. But let's jump back to where we left off. So Jesus has said, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. In other words, I've got this. The pressure's off. I rose from the dead, so I can definitely help you with everything else that you're going to come against. You know, to understand this a bit, you could try working out what the opposite is. The opposite would be something like, I've got a bit of authority around here, sometimes like when my dad's out of town, maybe. No, he says all authority. He could bring all of this to an end now if he wanted. He's in charge of everything. And he says, in light of that, the pressure's off, guys. In light of that, therefore go. Now, as Miriam said, if you start here, if you start with therefore go, you're most likely to say therefore no, because that's not good news. Therefore go, in light of everything I've done for you, in light of the fact that I've got this, go. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. In these two verses, Jesus gives us an eternal purpose in everything we do. Our time with our family, our friends, our colleagues, we are to teach them the way of Jesus with our words and with our actions. And this verse kind of sheds a bit of light on why it's fine that if we have doubts, that just because you've got doubts doesn't mean you're disqualified, because what we are to be is disciples of the way, to learn everything he's commanded. And Jesus, to be a learner, to be his disciple, by definition means you still have things to learn. You still have questions that you need to have answers to. Jesus has shown us what to do, and our job is to grapple with that, work it out for ourselves in community, and also teach that to others. Do you know what? Jesus has shown his disciples how to handle people with no money, how to handle people with lots of money, the sick, the not sick, taxes, storms, death, even how to cook breakfast. Just with the Gospels, we've got a lot to go on before we even start and do theology about the things he didn't directly talk about. So question 2 is, what would you like to learn? What do you want to learn? What is the Spirit prompting you in at the moment? Maybe it's prayer, forgiveness, getting up on time, joy, work, dealing with tricky people. If you need a refresher, have a quick glance at the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 to 7. But just take a moment to ask, maybe in silence, just what do you want to learn? Ask the Spirit what he's talking to you at the moment, and then share that with one another. So pause here and then come back when you're done. In our last bit, we see this. Jesus finishes by saying, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. He's given us assurance. He said, look, I've got this. He's then given us purpose. He said, therefore go. And now he's promising us the support we need. He says, I've got this, and now I've got you. I've got you. He gives us support. And do you know what? He's fully invested to the very end. He's not going to just skip out when he gets a better deal, like a startup that gets sold before it's really made it. And that was its strategy all along. He's like, no, I'm in this till the very end. He doesn't send us off hoping we'll make it back, and when we do, he'll go through our report card and be like pass, fail, stamp. No, he's done away with the report card. He's already won. All authority is his, and so now we go knowing that he's got this, and also he's got us. I've got you, he says. I am with you. And Miriam finished by pointing out something really wonderful. She said that until she looked at this passage closely, she'd always pictured this as Jesus up a mountain and his disciples at the bottom, and he's got his arm outstretched and he's shouting at them, "Go!" But then she realized in verse 18, actually it says this, then Jesus came to them. He draws close to them. He doesn't shout this from afar, but he comes up close to us and he says, "Go, I am with you. I've got this. I've got you. Go. I've given you assurance. I've given you purpose. I've given you support. You have everything you need." And so the last question, which hopefully will lead us into prayer, is what is the good news of this passage for you? It's a question we should always ask. All scripture is gospel. It is good news. And so the question is, what is the good news of this passage? And what is the good news of this passage as you go to work tomorrow? What is the good news of this passage as you go to maybe a reunion dinner or maybe a tricky family or friend situation in the next few weeks? Just try and work out what is the promise here that you need to hold on to as you go. Just share that with one another and then pray into those situations. Hope you enjoy this. Have a good night and God bless.